On this episode of Still Loading, it's Hidden Gemtastic. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, it's going to be a broad conversation type of episode. We're going to kind of bounce all over, and we're talking about hidden gem games on the GameCube. And with me today, the host of his own YouTube channel, Bite Size Pixel, Veech, is with me. Veech, how are you doing today?
I'm all right, man. Thanks for having me back on. It's been a bit.
It's been a while. It's been a bit. We were talking off mic. The last time you were on was for the Luigi's Mansion episode, all the way back in 2019, which is weird because that's almost, by the time this episode comes out, that'll be almost 2 years ago, which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel that long ago, but. That episode is actually why I have you on for this one. So on that episode, I made a point, or I thought I made a good point about how on the GameCube, the library of the GameCube, there weren't a lot of good games, but the good games that were on there were these groundbreaking, monumental titles. And I also mentioned like anything outside of Nintendo wasn't really well received. And you made a couple points about, like there's actually a lot of good games that are more obscure or more or less well known. And some of them are Nintendo, but some of them aren't even developed by Nintendo, but they could have just been published. So I figured I'd have you on to talk about some of your personal favorite hidden gem GameCube games, whether that is Nintendo published / developed or not. Just kind of we can dive in and just kind of talk about it. So like, what are some of yours, I guess? Like what I guess actually, you know what? Let's start off with this. You're a big Nintendo fan, so what is one of what first got you into the GameCube? Was it something that it was the continuation of your Nintendo fandom, or was it something more like it just appealed to you?
Yeah, growing up, I never had the option to choose between like Nintendo and Sega, or like when Sony entered the game industry. Like a lot of my systems were gifted to me like for Christmas, like via Santa quote unquote brought them.
Quote unquote.
But eventually I found out it was my aunt who she would purchase these gifts for me, and my grandfather got me an NES. My aunt purchased a N64 for me. I never had a Super Nintendo, but my neighbor did. So I played a lot of Super Nintendo stuff over there. And then for Christmas one year, my grandfather bought me a GameCube. So it was just kind of like in my household, I stuck with Nintendo. I experienced other systems either through friends or through other family members. But for some reason for me, I enjoyed all of them, but for some reason for me, like it was just, I wanted to continue with Nintendo because I thought at least Nintendo's core character, their core IPs were solid enough to want to continue with them, as I got older. So that's what got me into the GameCube, was my grandfather bought it for me. I didn't have any say, but I appreciated the gift either way.
I mean, that's how it is for almost every kid, like your video game tastes and habits are really developed by, what you're given, as a kid. Unless you are one of those kids who don't get a lot of consoles and you kind of lived all of your experiences vicariously through your friends by going over to their house and playing their games or watching them play their games. Like for me, I've said before, my first console was the N64, and so I will always have that love for Nintendo, but because that was my first console. But I think I mentioned, oh my gosh, I don't even remember how long ago now, but it was, I forget which podcast it was, if it was on mine or if it was on a friend's, but I didn't want the N64 when I was a kid. I wanted a Sega Genesis because that's what my neighbors had, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And when I got my N64 and it wasn't a Sega Genesis, I was mad. I was like, this isn't a Sega Genesis. I didn't understand that it was like a more powerful console or that it was a newer console. And admittedly, like you could make the argument maybe the Genesis is better overall than the N64 in terms of library, but there's still great stuff to be had either way. So when it got to this generation, we got a PS2 because my uncle had a PS2. I definitely kind of was like a person who, this is what my friends have, I want that too. I didn't really branch out on my own until years later and tried picking other stuff. So the GameCube is something which is also why I'm glad you're on the episode, because the GameCube is a console where I played a little bit of it over at my friend Tristan's house, who's been on the show numerous times. And that's really about it. Like, I didn't own one until years later. And even when I did, I didn't play any of the games on it. A friend of mine, Micah, who was on the summer of PS2, I bought mine off of him. And that's where I got Melee. That's where I got Tales of Vesperia. Not Vesperia, I'm sorry. Tales of Symphonia. That's what it is. Tales of Symphonia. Yeah. I can't think of all the others right now, but I actually only paid $5 for Tales of Symphonia as well, which was a really good deal. You know,
that's a great game too. It's like one of my favorite games that I owned for the system, and it's actually what got me into the Tales series. Okay. It was that game, yeah. And I was very like at the time. I was very anti RPG. I just didn't like RPG games because mostly grew up spending my summers in arcades, and you didn't really see a lot of RPGs in arcades.
They're not really conducive to the arcade experience.
Yeah. So my home console experience, I tried to keep it similar to my arcade experience. So I did not get into RPGs until the GameCube.
Okay. And that's interesting because the GameCube isn't known to be like an RPG powerhouse, but it does have a few.
No.
Yeah, it's got and actually to kind of segue into some of these hidden gems, would you consider Tales of Symphonia a hidden gem or no?
I
feel like it's a medium, like right in the middle.
I feel like people know of the Tales series if they've just been if they are RPG fans. I think when it comes down to the idea of what is and what isn't a hidden gem, for me, it becomes what is worth keeping in your library that isn't a Nintendo first-party game, realistically. Because like a hidden gem is more, what's the term? Subjective. Like something that I think is a gem of that system, you might not like, and vice versa. So it is kind of broad in that term. I think when we're referring, some of the stuff that I'm going to be referring to at least is something that I feel like is worth keeping in a GameCube library for people who aren't completionist collectors. You know how there's like people who collect and they have to collect everything in that generation. I personally am not someone like that.
Same.
So the things that I keep are games that I enjoyed and I thought were worth keeping. And I would say that Tales is definitely a game worth keeping in a GameCube library. It's got tons of replayability. It's got a great story. It's a good introduction to the Tales series, which has been going on since, I believe, the
mid-90s, I think, at least.
Yeah. Did they have a Super Nintendo release, or were they? Because I have it on the Game Boy Advance. And I think that was a re-release of possibly a Super Nintendo game.
I'm looking it up right now just because I actually don't know. I've played very small snippets of Tales games. I actually popped in Tales of Symphonia a couple months ago just to like really sit down and go through it. And then, of course, I got sidetracked and didn't get very far. But there is...
It's a great game.
That's what I keep hearing. So the first Tales is Tales of Fantasia, and it came out in 95. Fantasia is for... hold on. Super Famicom only. So it was only released in Japan, and it didn't get a North American release until the Game Boy Advance in 2006.
Right. So So I was semi-correct in saying that. So I have Tales of Phantasia for the Game Boy. So that's the original. That's the original game in the series. And playing Tales of Symphonia made me want to experience more of the series. So when I saw that this was available, I went back and I purchased it, which I didn't beat it, but it's a good game, and I really should get through it. But I have a huge backlog right now.
I feel like that's because you're a collector as well. So it's the
semi.
It's the constant burden of a collector to have all those games and then be like, well, I don't know what I want to play, and you always have something to play, but there's just never enough time to get through them all.
I'm actually speaking of collecting, I'm actually staring at a Red Cart Maximum Carnage for the SNES.
Ooh.
It's a decent price, but I'm trying to haggle it down a little bit more. But it's on eBay, so it's like I'm waiting for a response, and hopefully I can get it at a little bit of a better deal.
How much are they asking for it? Just out of curiosity.
It's actually really good what they're asking for it right now. It's $16, just the cart.
Oh, wow.
$16
that's
just
really
the
good.
cart plus shipping, and the shipping's reasonable, but if I can get a couple bucks knocked off, I would prefer that, because I'm trying to. My issue is I am super into just. I'm very impulsive now, where before I used to be more reserved with purchasing things. I'd be like, oh, well, I'll wait to get that. I'll wait till I have a little bit more money. And then when I would have the funds to go get something, especially something that was limited edition or something like that, I would go back and I look for it and it was sold out. And I feel like I'm trying to be more, I guess...
Find a happy medium.
Yeah,
Don't be so frugal in the moment, but at the same time, don't go spending all the money just because you want something. Like, you still keep in mind, like, if I spent this, would I be able to survive after buying it? If I can, all right, then I'll pick it up.
Yeah. So I am probably going to pull the trigger on this. What's disappointing is that I do have a copy of Maximum Carnage, just a standard gray cart, but it's hard to justify purchasing a game twice, not by accident.
Yeah.
I've done that before. I've purchased games twice by accidents. Like, I have 2 copies of Sly Cooper. I have 2 copies of Super Mario for the SNES, just because I forget I have them, and it's kind of special. But But anyway, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm surprised I haven't had more of that issue, because you can see it on the video here, like the wall of games that is behind me. But that's all like PS2, PS3. A lot of those are like childhood games or games that I picked up as the consoles came out. So it's not like it was retroactive buying. But in any case, let's get back to the GameCube games. But the reason I was asking if you thought it was a hidden gem, because to me, the definition of a hidden gem is that it has to have some level of consensus quality, because obviously games are subjective to a degree. You can make some objective judgments on certain aspects of it and like objective judgments on games themselves, but all in all, it's still going to be subjective. The worst game is somebody's favorite game somewhere. So it is subjective in that sense, but like I feel like there is a consensus around some of these games that they have to be good, otherwise it wouldn't be a gem, right? There have to be some level of quality to it. Now, with that said, it's almost, to me, like hidden gems are synonymous with cult classics. The games that not a lot of people know about, but the ones that do, the OGs that do, love it to death and would die for the game. And there's a handful on the GameCube. Just kind of looking up some of them, like Chibi Robo is something that not a lot of people, I feel, know about. There's a couple sequels. There's a sequel on the 3DS. I don't know if that's the only sequel.
No. So Chibi Robo, the series has a few installations from what I understand. There was one specifically for the DSi. That required you to have the DSi, and like you would take photos and stuff like that. There's 2, I believe, on the 3DS. Ziplash being the most recent one, which came with the amiibo, which I assume is the one that you're thinking of, correct?
Yeah, I actually have it boxed with the amiibo right now.
Yeah, I
looking at
purchased
it.
I purchased it because I am a big fan of Chibi Robo, and that was one of the games that I did want to talk about. But then there was another one on the 3DS, and I believe it was like called like Park something, where you like went around cleaning up a park or something like that. It was it was more semi-traditional Chibi Robo. But from what I understand, there's at least 4 in the series. But Chibi Robo on the GameCube is a game that I picked up, and I absolutely loved that game. I thought it was very interesting.
Well, let's dive into it a little bit then. Like, because I will eventually want to do full deep dive episodes on these games. So like just kind of like some broad strokes about it. Because I'm just trying to look it up real quick. Yeah. So Chibi Robo Ziplash is the newest one. It's the most recent one from 2015. That was the last time they had one come out. But the reason I wanted to look up quick is that while this is a Nintendo published game, it was actually developed by Skip Ltd and Bandai. It's interesting because it's kind of like that hybrid where it's not like a first party Nintendo game, but it is a Nintendo game.
It feels at place. It feels at home with other Nintendo IPs, I would say. And I think the reason is the art style. It was very bright and colorful, for the time, especially back then. A lot of Nintendo's competitors had more, were going for more realistic games. Chibi Robo played on the lighter hearted side. And it had an interesting narrative. The overall concept of being a tiny cleaner robot in a family, and you're trying to help this family with their day-to-day problems while doing your required cleaning up after them as well. It was similar to a game that I always compare it to is Mr. Mosquito on the PlayStation 2, which is like another. Mr. Mosquito is like a hidden gem on the PS2 that goes for a lot of money these days, I believe.
Does it?
Yeah, if you look it up on eBay. I'll look it up and I'll tell you what it is if you want to chime in on that. Yeah, Mr. Mosquito complete on eBay goes for $169.99.
It was 30 cents off from a really good number. 30 cents the other. It should have gone down 30 cents to get that nice number. I don't know. I've heard of Mr. Mosquito, but I never really played it. Wow, if it's going for 160, that someone's overcharging. Looking it up on price charting, Mr. Mosquito is worth 75 complete. Now, I don't always go by price charting, of course, because like price charting is relative. It just kind of takes the pulse of that specific moment and it, averages stuff out. But still, 75 is expensive for a PS2 game. But what I thought, like, without knowing much about Chibi Robo, I looked up some of the gameplay of it, because a lot of, like, another purpose of this episode is to kind of convince me to, give more of a chance to the GameCube. There was I was mentioning off mic, there's a podcast that I was on called The GameCube Was Cool, and I talked about Metal Arms Glitch in the System on them, which I'll talk a little bit about today. I did an episode on that a while ago, so I'm not going to go too long, but it is a hidden gem on the GameCube, but it was released on more than just the GameCube. But those guys, like, after listening to how passionate they were about the GameCube, and also how, like, listening to you talk about, your love of it, I'm like, I really need to dive more into this console's library, because really I haven't played many games for the GameCube. I've beaten the original Luigi's Mansion, I've beaten Wind Waker, but I did that on the HD version on top of that. I've played a lot of Metroid Prime, but I never beat it because the Metroids freaked me out when I first played it. They just scared me, like, jumping on top. So there's a lot on this console that I haven't played. So Chibi Robo stood out to me when I was watching the gameplay of it, was just how it was like this. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Toy Story 2 for the N64, where you're at a toy level and you're exploring this open world of the house and you're having to do different tasks. Now, Chibi Robo has a lot more to do in it than Toy Story 2 did. I'm not trying to compare the two in that sense. Just the idea, the feeling of a toy coming to life and wandering around. Now, what I was blown away by in kind of a strange way was watching the opening cutscene and how this daughter of this couple can't stop wearing a frog hat or something like that. It's such a weird narrative, but I guess it kind of makes sense for such a fun, goofy plot.
I think
goofy character.
It falls into a trope of it being very heavily influenced by the development team. Probably certain tropes and stuff like that. I mean, I would assume, what's the name of the development studio? Skip, yeah, LTD. My assumption is that they're a Japanese based studio, and usually smaller studios that are based in Japan really heavily either satirize or reference the culture there, and so. You wouldn't normally see something like that. Like that creative thought process isn't necessarily something that you see a lot in Western developers.
Depending on the size of the developer, of course.
That's true. And also,
we also remember we had Untitled Goose Game, and there's also a Western I think it's Western developed game called I Am Bread, where you just play as a piece of toast trying to get cooked.
Yeah, and that also that also depends on what their influences are too. From what I understand, the Untitled Goose Game, I believe they're Australian or British?
Are
or
they
something
Australian?
Like that? Yeah, I think they're one of the former colony countries. I want to say they're Australian. I'm not 100% sure on that. They're either Australian or British. But the overall, the concept and the aesthetic of Chibi Robo, you see it in certain characters, and like the daughter, or there's like an action figure that kind of parodies like the Kamen Rider characters, the way that they act and that type of stuff, and the way he poses and he moves. And I think it was very polarizing because like me and my best friend, we both played it, and he absolutely hated the game. He couldn't stand the way that the characters talked. Like they did a similar thing to kind of like how Animal Crossing had like a mumbled gibberish type thing.
Yeah.
He absolutely hated that, and he said that that the gameplay wasn't enough to keep him engaged in it to ignore that type of that dialogue. I thought it was
interesting.
I thought it was great. I mean, I thought it was like creative and different way of storytelling, especially because like a game like Animal Crossing was out at the time, I believe, as well, and that like sped up gibberish type dialogue never really bothered me.
That's a weird hill to die on too, because like it's just interesting how that. I mean, but everyone has their own buttons that you can't help but get frustrated by, like when something irks you to your core. Like I don't know, I've had this debate with a friend a lot about like how much are you willing to put up with in a game before you quit? Like what is a deal breaker for you? And it's just interesting, and it's weird because I don't even know what mine is. Mine, it feels like it changes from moment to moment. I'm sure someone, like a friend of mine who knows me pretty well would probably be able to just be like, oh, it's definitely this, because I guess I can't see what's that expression? I can't see the trees among the forest, or the forest among the trees, or what. I don't know if that even applies to this, but I'm losing the thread here. But it's interesting to me that that's like the reason why. It's because it didn't bother me at all when I watched the gameplay. I just thought the idea of like the opening cutscene is for this young girl's birthday, and the mom tries to buy this girl a hat, and she wears it, smiles, and then frowns, and then shakes her head, and it falls off. It was super goofy, but in a good way. Like that, it literally captured my imagination to the point where I'm like, I need to keep watching this to see like what is the point of this game.
Yeah, it's very it doesn't show you its hand right out of the gate. It makes you think that you're just like this robot that was purchased to kind of help around the house, and then in doing what you're supposed to do, you start to kind of figure out that this family has underlying issues that you then end up it's like weird because it's like kind of like a weird Toy Story theme in a way, where like everything kind of the world, the house comes to life after everybody goes away or goes to sleep, or isn't really paying attention, and you interact with different toys and different stuff that kind of have like that are sentient, and you start to slowly understand that like this family has problems that you then feel obligated to help them out with, because you're a robot, you're programmed, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So all right, I don't want to dwell too much on it, because like I said, I want to.
You want to do a deeper dive, yeah.
Yeah, I want to devote full episodes to some of these, because I feel like there's enough to talk about with, like, especially with that, like, to dive into, like, I want to play through the game first, and then, or at least play at least portion of it, and then research the rest. But in any case, what's another hidden gem that really sticks out to you?
Something that really sticks out to me personally, like if I'm looking at my library of games, is probably the first game that I bought on my GameCube, which was a game called Freedom Fighters. The game itself was a multi-platform game. I believe it was also on Xbox and PlayStation. It was actually, I don't know if it was. It might have not been the first game that I bought, but it was like one of the games I remember having kind of being like that I played a lot. So I don't know if it was just like whatever the situation was. It, like when I think of the GameCube, I think of this game, and it was developed by. Let me actually look it up so I can give you proper information. So Freedom Fighters was developed by IO Interactive, which they worked on the Hitman series, and
they're making the new James Bond game coming out.
Are they really?
Oh, I'm so excited! That's such a perfect fit for that license.
They so it was developed by IO and published by EA. And it was cross-platform, so GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. It was a third-person shooter, like cover-based shooter, but they also had like recruitment elements to it. Like you would go through different levels, and you would try to. It was okay. So there would be multiple points of interest on a map, and you would have to figure out how you want to tackle it to progress through the level. Like, specifically, like there would be a certain level, and you would know that there would be like a reinforcement. Like they had a barracks for reinforcements, and then they had a power generator for certain things. So you would decide like, what's my priority? Do I want to take out their line of supply first, or do I want to take out the reinforcements first? And the scenario was, I believe it was like the Soviet Union occupied New York, so it takes place in New York City.
Okay.
Basically, you're fighting to free New York from Soviet occupation, and it was great. It was a great game. I played it a lot. I played it a lot, actually, now that I think about it. I beat it many, many times.
It just, the way you're describing it kind of reminds me of, like, it seems like really forward thinking too, and it's rated really highly on almost everything. You can get it on Steam. Like,
is it on Steam?
Yeah, you can. I see a listing for it on Steam, because it was also released for PC. Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious like how well it runs still. But actually, you know what? While we're talking, I'm going to look it up on my own Steam account. But the reason I thought it was like interesting, kind of forward thinking, is the way you were describing how it's like it's a map that you can look around, like you can pick points. There's points of interest to go, and then you can determine the order to complete the mission's objectives and that kind of thing. I thought that was that's really forward thinking, because I remember seeing that in other games, but later on. Like this game came out in 2003, and the first time I remember seeing something like that was, and I'm sure that it happened before because it happened in here, but the first time I remember seeing something like that was in the Medal of Honor series. In Medal of Honor European Assault, what you would do is that they would drop you into a mission, and instead of being a linear mission like every other Medal of Honor, you would have a list of objectives, and you could complete them in any order. And so It kind of reminds me of this, but this is third person, and it seems has a little bit more personality than Medal of Honor European Assault did, which is just a very generic FPS. And
there was
that's crazy. You can get it on Steam for, like, right now it's on sale for $7.50.
That's not bad. It's definitely worth picking up. I mean, in this point, when this was released, when this episode's released, it's probably not going to be on sale for $7.50. But
Yeah, because it's the right. We are recording this during the Steam Christmas sale. Actually, you know what? Let's just put a date on it. We're recording this on New Year's Day, 2021. We survived 2020, baby.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's what I liked about it is this was like before. I'm pretty sure it had a cover system. I remember like there would be a lot of like chest high walls and stuff like that. I might be remembering it wrong, but I do recall
there seems to be a lot, because I'm looking at screenshots on Steam right now, and there's a lot of people standing behind chest high walls. Once again, man, forward thinking, predicted Gears of War.
Yeah, and I remember really, really enjoying this game. It's definitely one of the games that I would recommend at least having in your collection if you are collecting for any of the systems. You can get it on GameCube or PlayStation or Xbox. I mean, I played it on GameCube, and anybody that had it, I would recommend it. It had multiplayer. You kind of like played like control points and stuff like that. It was a great game. Really, really good game. And the one thing I did like about it is they had a slight nod to Nintendo in the beginning of the game, and I don't know if it was specifically for the GameCube version, but the character that you play, him and his brother are both plumbers in New York City, and like they both kind of dress slightly different from each other. Like they're wearing the same thing, but they have like very obvious like nods to the Mario Brothers being plumbers in New York. Mm-hmm. So I always thought that was funny. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but
I mean, I would assume it has to be, because even if it appeared on other consoles, it doesn't necessarily have to be on just the GameCube version or anything. Like, I mean, Mario influenced a ton of stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised. This kind of reminds me, just to kind of transition a little bit, another hidden gem. If you haven't played this, Vin, I definitely suggest it. Metal Arms Glitch in the System. I did an episode on this, it's probably like 3-4 years ago now, with my friend Andrew from The Experience Point. And it's a third-person shooter, which is why I kind of thought this would be a good transition from Freedom Fighters to this. And it's a third-person shooter where you play as a robot named Glitch, and you wake up, like you're kind of like discovered in this scrap heap by these other robots called droids, and you kind of wake up into this world of this civil war between the droids and the Millbots, and you have to, the droids are the good guys, Millbots are the bad guys, and you have to fight your way through to save the droids, essentially. That's the plot in a nutshell. But what makes the game fun is that there's a ton of different weapons, and you can hot swap them out, and that since he's a droid, it's like grafted into his arm. So whenever he gets a new weapon, or if you want to change weapons, he literally plucks off the gun that you're using off his arm, sticks it into like this compartment in his back, and pulls out another one and attaches it. So you have this thing called a spew, which is a machine gun. You have a scatter blaster, which is your shotgun, and you're fighting a bunch of other robots. And now what makes this game unique, though, because the shooter mechanic, it's just a shooter with a bunch of different guns. But what makes it unique for the time is that the enemies had targeted location damage. So if you decide to shoot an enemy's arm, you could blow it off, and the enemy is going to be fine because it's just a robot. So they got away with a teen rating with all this violence because you're just blowing off robot arms, so there's no blood.
Yeah.
But what you could do is that you could fuck up their body a little bit too, where say you shoot their arm a bunch, but you don't blow it off. If you do enough damage to it, instead of them being able to control it, you'll damage to the point where they can no longer control what that arm does. So they still have the ability to shoot, but now their arms flailing all over the place, and they can't really control where they're aiming. So they could shoot their allies, they could shoot themselves. And with the machine gun bots, it doesn't make much of a difference. And the Millbots, unlike you, they can't hot swap weapons. If there's a Millbot that has a machine gun, that's all they get. If they have a shotgun, that's all they get. On their non-gun arm that's grafted in, they can throw grenades, and you can screw up the grenade arm too. So say you shoot that arm enough to the point where they can't control it. If they decide to throw a grenade at you, they might just throw it into their own feet and blow themselves up. And you can even get to the point where you can like break their back, which sounds really awful, but they'll have both their arms and they're kind of almost looks like they're burning it, like they're just hunched all the way back over, and they're just running around. Their body's just like limp, and they're just looking straight up at the sky, just while their feet are running around perfectly fine. And you can even shoot it off to where it's just a pair of legs just running around, and the legs can hurt you. They will kick you if you're not careful.
Those types of mechanics in shooters I feel like were interesting to see back in the day, because we were so used to seeing shooters be one way. You know what I mean? And I feel like stuff like that like makes the engagements more dynamic as opposed to kind of expected, especially back then. It sounds interesting. I'll have to see if I can find it for a good price if I can pick it up.
And it wasn't just on GameCube. You could get it on PS2 and Xbox. So if you have any of those, that's also an option for you. And it came out in 2003, which is what's crazy. Like all those mechanics, and it's still a pretty early. I mean, it's about midway through the console's life cycle, but still. Then you could also, since they're all robots, you get this thing later on called the control tether. And what you could do is that you could, if you snuck up behind a robot and you shot the control tether into the robot's D port, which sounds a lot dirtier than it actually is.
Okay.
You actually transport Glitch's like consciousness into that Millbot, and you take over them. Glitch's body falls apart, and now you've taken over this other robot. So now you can go in and kind of fuck shit up, and you won't. If that robot dies, you just go right back to your body. So it kind of gives you that freedom to kind of suicide rush stuff in, or like do scouting unknown, because like they think you're a bad guy too. And there's more powerful enemies called Titans, which like have twin chain guns for hands and like a side shoulder mounted rocket launcher. You can take over them as well. And each weapon has an upgrade system too. So like you have your machine gun, your shotgun. You also have a thing called a rivet gun, which is essentially your sniper. You can upgrade each of those, and my favorite was the rivet gun, because when you upgraded it all the way, the rivets would explode after they were struck. So like once it impacts an enemy, a little blue flame would come out, and then like a split second later it would explode. So you could shoot it right into a Millbot's joint, like right on their shoulder, and then once it explodes, their arm goes crazy because you targeted that arm. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds pretty cool. I'll definitely have to look into it. Definitely. I mean, I know I saw it. So during the GameCube era, like back in I was in high school, I want to say, and I saw a lot of these games in GameStop. I used to work at GameStop, so I saw a lot of these games, but I think I was really selective with what I wanted to try at the time, and I know I saw it probably 100 times, and I just never gave it the shot. It sounds like it's something I should have played at the time, but
when you look at the cover, it just looks generic. Like you probably, especially like,
because especially back then we had like Ratchet and Clank and Sly Cooper and Jack and Daxter. It probably in my head I thought that it was trying to appeal to that type of demographic, and I never played any of them, so I never really got into it.
It's a great game. It's worth checking out. And like I could sing this game's praises all day long, but I already did an episode on it. Maybe in years later I'll do a redo on it, because I feel like nothing against Andrew. I've said this before. I actually kind of want to redo some of my older episodes, because now that I've got this experience and I know more what to do with podcasting, I feel like I could do a better job on some of those. But I digress. So what's another one of your favorite hidden gems, or maybe a good non-Nintendo game too? I mean, actually, you just listed Freedom Fighters, but what's another one?
Another one, and this was a game that I remember came out, and a lot of reviewers were really like kind of confused about it, or they didn't really give it the best reviews from what I remember, and it was Cubivore, Survival of the Fittest. And I don't know if
that's an expensive game now. I've never played it.
I'm lucky enough to have a copy, and unfortunately this is developed by Nintendo. It is developed by Nintendo, but it's so obscure that I think Nintendo, they just did this and then they were just like, you know what, this, like, we're just gonna leave this alone. It was
this a first party game too?
Well, it's weird because it says it's developed by Nintendo, but it also has Atlus's logo on it. So
okay, so the developers is Saru Brunei and Intelligent Systems, and then the publishers. It was published in Japan by Nintendo and in North America by
Atlus. Okay, maybe so. My understanding was
so it's
backwards.
not a Nintendo game, but it is. I mean, Nintendo published it just in Japan.
Well, isn't Intelligent Systems affiliated with Nintendo in some way?
I think they are now.
Second
I don't
party
know
or
if they
like
were
that?
then.
I mean, I'm looking on the Wikipedia and it says they developed the Mario.
Yeah,
Brothers.
they developed Donkey Kong 3 and Mario Bros for the NES. I wonder if they just ported some of these though. Because it also said they did Sim City, so a lot of these must be ports. But even so, they had to have had a close relationship with Nintendo because they wouldn't, like, Nintendo doesn't trust just anybody to do it. Oh yeah, they produced Paper Mario for the N64, which ended up becoming a surprise hit, and they did the first entry for WarioWare. So yeah, they have it's not technically first party, but it might as well be.
I think they're either second party or specifically they have a contract with Nintendo. But
yeah,
going back to Cube of War, it was such a weird experience. It was such a weird game. It was like simple, yet kind of like deep in a way, because the overall objective was to reach a certain point, to then reproduce, to then play as your offspring in the next life cycle, to then evolve. And you were like, your overall goal was to get new evolution parts to develop your character. It was close to what Spore was trying to do, but before Spore.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I feel like. Sorry, go on.
It was a cool game, and like, so from what I remember, and it's been forever since I played it, but from what I remember, like, you would get evolutionary parts by like consuming other prey or other predators, and they were all designed. I don't know if they were specifically designed to be procedural, like where it's kind of random how they look, but. Mm-hmm. If you were successful in taking down another animal and you were able to rip off that that evolution part that you didn't have, that would then be open to you for the next generation to potentially have that evolution trait.
That is a very interesting design idea. Like, it's genetics the game.
Yeah.
Kind of, but like, in a simplistic version with I'm assuming less variables than actual genetic code, obviously. But
yeah,
that's still really crazy, though.
Yeah, it was a fun game, and I know a lot of people. From what I understand, a lot of people wrote it off. They thought it was a little too obscure, but I thought it was a great game. I'm glad I have it, because it is, like you said, it is really hard to find. It is very expensive if you want to try to get it in your library.
Once this pandemic's over, I might ask to borrow it from you so I can try it out.
Yeah.
But we were talking off mic about this, and I think it's a good point to make. Nintendo during the GameCube really tried to create a lot of new IPs, because after... I mean, pretty much, one of the tropes of Nintendo is that they stick to their same 5 or 6 IPs and they don't really create new ones. Mm-hmm. And that's not 100% true, obviously, because Pikmin is a perfect example. It's a big IP now from the GameCube. Then you go to, you look at the Wii U, you got Splatoon, and that's its own IP now as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there was I'm sure there was a new IP they created for the Wii, but I just can't think of it that has stuck. But what I think is interesting is at the GameCube, they tried so many of these ideas, like Chibi Robo being something they published. Even though they didn't develop it directly, Nintendo as a publisher pretty much has a big say in a lot of stuff. So that is something that they tried out. Same with to an extent Cubivore, because Intelligent Systems is pretty much a huge part of Nintendo. We haven't talked about it yet, but Geist, that was also a Nintendo game. And that, like, looking that game up, unless you have some more to talk about Cubivore, Geist just blew me away when I saw that.
No, we can. I mean, I remember seeing Geist, and it was a game that I wanted to try, but I never got around to it.
What I watched of it is that it is it's a first-person shooter where you play as a guy who's separated from his body. Like, his soul is separated from a body, so you play as a ghost. Like, Geist is another word for ghost, right? Mm-hmm. And you can possess other people and inanimate objects even. So if you say there's a situation where there's a mission where you need a gun, then you have to possess a soldier. But you can also apparently possess even like office chairs and stuff like that. Like, you can possess a ton of different stuff. And some people that you have to possess, you have to, like, they're a little bit too guarded, so you have to scare them to weaken their defenses. So you might have to do a couple things to to freak them out a little bit, and then you can possess them. So it was an interesting idea for a first-person shooter or a first-person game where you are playing as a ghost that possesses other objects and other people, and that's how you have to progress through the game, is by possessing people. So that way they can take you to places that you can't do on your own.
Yeah, there was thinking back about it now, like when that game came out, like I said, I remember being interested in it, but I never got around to picking it up. Geist and a game that I have in my library called Second Sight came out around the same time. Mm-hmm. And Second Sight was a shooter where you also had like telekinetic powers. Like, you had like these special abilities. You would either be like telekinesis or pyrokinesis, that type of stuff. And I remember being interested in both of them, but I never picked them up. I ended up getting Second Sight later on, like I want to say maybe within the past 10 years, but I got into it a little. I got into it a little bit, like, in my collection. I played it a little bit, but I never really got fully into it, unfortunately.
I'm looking up Second Sight right now, and just the visuals look really interesting. Like, the visuals look pretty good for a game as old as it is. It's from 2004, and the cover of it just looks really. It's very striking because it's like a bald man with his head in his hands, and he's got a gun in the one hand. And it's published by Codemasters and developed by Free Radical Design.
Yeah, Free Radical, actually, I guess if we want to talk about gems on the GameCube, Free Radical was the same company that developed Time Splitters, the Time Splitter series. Mm-hmm. And I have Time Splitters 2 on the GameCube, and it's probably one of my favorite shooters back in that era because it felt like GoldenEye, but a little bit more different. It was nice. It was a great game. That's definitely a game that I would recommend picking up if you can find it for any system. But if you have a GameCube, Time Splitters 2, definitely worth finding and definitely worth adding to your library.
I feel like the Time Splitter series is just something that really has not been, it hasn't really been brought up in a while, which is a shame because I've heard so many good things about it. I actually have the original. No, wait, do I have the original or do I have Time Splitters 2? I have one of them. I don't remember which one. But I've just heard so many good things about it. And it's just a bummer because it's like, I wonder, it's always interesting to me where there's a franchise that did really well for a little while and then just dies away, and not due to any particular reason, because the last game was really good. It's just interesting. It's just weird to me.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the series. Like, I picked it up because the art style reminded me of Freedom Fighters a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I back then I was kind of trying to piece together things that I thought looked similar. So I picked that up because I had played Freedom Fighters, and on the box art they had advertised like a quote from a reviewer. It said they said that Time Splitters was this generation's GoldenEye, and I grew up playing GoldenEye. I loved GoldenEye, so I bought it. The story is great. The art style is great. It's it allowed you to, I think it allowed you to build your own levels for multiplayer as well. And it was cool because it's like the character would go through different time periods, and so you would have each level would be different types of weapons you would have available to you. It was a great game. It was a lot of fun. And I know they made another one, which I have yet to find. It was Future Perfect. It came out for the GameCube, the PS2, and the Xbox, I believe. And
the same developer, or
that was, I believe, it was developed by Free Radical. Yeah, but I can't find it. I can't find. I mean, and if at least I can't find it for the GameCube.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Time Splitters Future Perfect. It did get released on GameCube. It was GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. Came out in 2005. Huh. I don't know. See, for me, the PS2, the generations GoldenEye was just another 007 game. I played Nightfire a lot. You ever played 007 Nightfire on the GameCube?
I think I did, but I don't recall being too crazy about it. Wasn't Nightfire also on the Nintendo 64?
No.
It was like the blue cartridge.
No, that's The World Is Not Enough.
Is it?
And I loved The World Is Not Enough. I actually like it more than GoldenEye, controversial opinion. But like, it's not my favorite James Bond game. I just really enjoy it. No, with The World Is Not Enough, I like that. But with Nightfire had like really robust multiplayer. It had AI bots, which I always called owl bots because I didn't understand that it was like an uppercase I that didn't just have the serifs at the top, so it was very confusing. But it had AI bots, and you could like ramp up the difficulty on them. Had a large variety of levels to choose from, tons and tons and tons of different weapons and like game modes, and you could do so many different things on it. You could, like, one of my favorite things to do was we would turn on all explosives and then pick the smallest level possible. And we always called it like 2 for the price of 10, where like every time you shot something, you would always end up hurting yourself more often than you would end up hurting the enemy. So it just kind of created this ridiculous, fun atmosphere for it. And it was great. It was a really good game in general. A lot of the 007 games from that era I thought were really good. It's odd because they were all done by EA before EA went, batshit crazy with the stuff they do.
Right.
But like Agent Under Fire was the first one. It was pretty good. Nightfire was legitimately like a really good FPS, and apparently it played really well on the GameCube. I was talking to Neil and Mike from the GameCube Was Cool podcast, and like Nightfire is their favorite Bond game as well, at least to date. And then there was a third one called Everything or Nothing, which is actually the name of the Bond movie production company. Eon Productions, or Eon in general, is an acronym for Everything or Nothing.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Which is the motto of the Bond producers. Anyway.
For some reason,
great game, though.
For some reason in the GameCube era, I just kind of fell out of the James Bond series because I really liked GoldenEye. I really enjoyed it. I just, for some reason, just kind of stopped following it. I don't know why.
I mean, I guess it just depends on what hits you too, especially because like James Bond in the early to mid 2000s kind of lost a lot of its cool appeal to a lot of people because the last movie that came out prior to those games being released was Die Another Day. Okay. And Die Another Day is a rough movie to get into. Okay. It is a good example of being so bad it's good.
Okay.
But, those types of movies, they're meant for a very specific audience. And obviously that wasn't their intention to make it so bad that it's good. But it kind of turned out that way. Like, I kid you not, this is an actual line from the movie. Okay. Halle Berry plays another secret agent, and cool idea. It was a really good idea because they were going to have Bond and her kind of competing for the information, and they end up helping each other, and they were going to spin off Halle Berry into her own franchise based off of her character Jinx. And
Weird.
Yeah.
Not a great name for an agent, but all right.
Yeah, and they kind of make the groaning joke about, like she's a jinx, she's always getting herself into jams and stuff like that. But there's a scene where she gets captured and she's like on this board, and there's like it's a very Goldfinger-esque thing where there's like a laser pointing at her, like a thing that's going to shoot a laser that will kill her.
Right.
And the bad guy is like, "Who do you work for?" or something like that. And I kid you not, her line is, "Your mama," and she wants me to tell you she's very disappointed in you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you had a your mama joke, and not even a good one, but a your mama joke in a James Bond movie? Are you kidding me? And so Bond comes in, and what happens is, I don't know why, but someone bumps a button and hits a button, and all the lasers start going haywire. It's not like something spilled on some electronics and it caused it. The lasers literally start shooting everywhere. So Bond is having to dodge these lasers while pushing Jinx out of the way so she doesn't get killed by them. And it just leaves you to wonder, if that happened because they pressed a button, that means that button's entire purpose is to make the lasers go batshit crazy.
Right.
Why would anyone design a button to make all the lasers go batshit crazy? That seems really dangerous. Anyway,
I guess a logical oversight.
Super logical oversight. But there's so much in that movie, dude. And on top of that, that whole scene is happening in a castle literally made out of ice.
Oh.
In Antarctica or some shit like that. It's insane. It is one of the most insane movies I've ever seen. So if you want a movie that's just so bad it's good, it's got some serious moments. It's got some really groany one-liners. It's probably Pierce Brosnan at his best and worst in some he's really good in some scenes, and other scenes it's just kind of like, and I don't blame any of it on him. He just got shitty dialogue. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
That's all right.
But yeah, so what's another hidden gem you'd like to talk about?
Let me look at what I got. So we talked about Cubivore, we talked about Chibi Robo.
We did Metal Arms, we did Freedom Fighters,
Fighters.
A little bit of Geist, because neither of us had really known much about it, but we highlighted it.
Mm-hmm. I would say, so a game that I absolutely love on the GameCube, and it's unfortunate to kind of keep bringing it up because it feels like it does kind of cheapen the value of a GameCube, but this was another cross-platform game, and it's Crazy Taxi, which is obviously developed by Sega. It came out on the Dreamcast, and I believe it was also for the PlayStation 2. And in think it's like everybody has, it's like you were saying, let's try to figure out really good games worth owning that Nintendo didn't develop. Nintendo really, even to this day, seems to have a really hard time holding down exclusive third-party deals. I mean, I would, if I didn't own a GameCube, I probably wouldn't have experienced. No, that's not true with this game specifically. But if I didn't own a GameCube, I wouldn't have experienced a lot of the game franchises that I really enjoy to this day. And Crazy Taxi is a game that I absolutely love in any iteration of it, especially on the GameCube. I originally got into the series in the arcades. I would play it in the arcades all the time. Mm-hmm. And I loved it so much in the arcades, I bought it on the GameCube. And what's great about the GameCube version is that it has the original soundtrack that is no longer available in updated versions of Crazy Taxi. They never renewed the soundtrack license. So if you were to get it on Steam, it's all new generic rock music and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a reason why you can't stream Crazy Taxi on Twitch because all the music is copyrighted to hell and back.
Yeah, and so I think the soundtrack is half of the personality of Crazy Taxi. The Offspring and Bad Religion do a great job just being part of the soundtrack. It's such a simple concept, but it's so fun and such a joy to play every time. I still pop it in every once in a while to play it. But it's definitely a game worth owning if you have a GameCube. It's unfortunate though that the GameCube only ever received the first Crazy Taxi because Sega went to go release 2 and 3 on the Dreamcast, but never really kind of gave the GameCube those options as well. Which I don't know. Take that for what it is. I have them. I have Crazy Taxi 2 and 3 on the Dreamcast as well, but I don't have that attachment to them like I do with Crazy Taxi 1.
I mean, because that was your first experience with it, so it's not really gonna ever really live up to it. Yeah, I just actually Googled Crazy Taxi 2. I'm like, has it been released on anything else? And as of now, Crazy Taxi 2, I haven't checked 3 yet, but Crazy Taxi 2 has not been released on anything else. Besides that, Crazy Taxi 3 got a PC and Xbox release.
Okay.
And then, wow, there's a Crazy Taxi for the Game Boy Advance.
I'm not surprised.
I did not know that.
You'd be surprised how many games are on the Game Boy Advance. Did you know there's a Max Payne on the Game Boy Advance? I found that out yesterday.
I did not know that, but I did know, and I'd be curious now to see how Max Payne, if it, let me see what it looks like in screenshots. But what I was going to say is the Game Boy Advance had some weird ideas of let's put first-person shooters on this handheld 16-bit console. Okay, so Max Payne for the Game Boy Advance is isometric. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Shadowrun for like the Super Nintendo looks like.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Shadowrun for the Genesis, but yeah.
Not only is it isometric, it's isometric 3D. Those characters are 3D. Apparently the company that developed it had to I was watching a documentary on it last night, and they had to they had to build their own engine specifically to getting it to run on there, and apparently it was a technical feat for them to get it to run on that system.
I'll say that's insane that it's 3D models, because once again the GBA is meant more for 16-bit stuff, so that's generally a better 2D thing. I literally have, I'll show it to you after we're done recording, I actually have a boxed copy of 007 Nightfire for the Game Boy Advance, and it's first person. They also released Medal of Honor Underground for the Game Boy Advance, and it's also first person, and it's rough. It does not hold up well. Like textures, like the scaling on the textures is wild, where it's like you'll walk up to a wall and like the farther are you away from the wall, the textures expand. So when you get close to it, the best way I can describe it, they have a texture on a wall to show arcs, so it looks like it's like an overhang or something, and the arcs are holding up the overhang. Yeah. But obviously it's just a flat texture, but depending on the distance you are from the wall determines how many arcs appear on the same space of wall. So the farther you are away, it might be only 2 because it's huge, but when you get in closer, it could be like 6. And as you walk along, the parts of it just disappear, like textures just disappear behind other polygons. It is a rough port, and I'm just like, who decided this was a good idea?
Yeah, I feel like the Game Boy Advance was really developed to specifically either be like a RPG or platformer type game or type system. The fact that some companies did do really good stuff with it is amazing, but not every idea translates well.
No, I mean, if you look at Nintendo's history of handhelds, it always was like, let's take the last console and make it portable. So,
right.
The Game Boy is the NES portable. Granted, the Game Boy did come out a year before the Super Nintendo, but you get the idea.
Right.
Game Boy Advance, portable Super Nintendo. DS is kind of like, it's not quite a portable GameCube. It's more of like a souped-up Game Boy Advance that's capable of 3D. 3DS, I would say, is more of like it's like a portable Wii, but minus all the motion controls, And then obviously the Switch is the Switch. The Switch is like their most recent thing,
right?
Which is a new, new handheld console hybrid. I will say, to kind of bring it back to what you were saying before about how Nintendo's had a history of having a hard time of getting third-party support. I would agree with that up until from like after the Super Nintendo up until now, they have not been good with it. The Switch, they finally are getting good third-party support, and a lot of it is because of the indie scene on the Switch is so strong.
I think the indie scene support really comes down to Nintendo working on the Wii U to try to entice indie developers onto there. Like the Wii U, they had a lot of strong support in the indie scene. So I think with the Switch coming out, it was just more incentive for those indie developers to stick with Nintendo. I actually did an episode talking about the eShop and the indie scene, and I kind of touched on how it's great that Nintendo is appealing to the indie scene, but they have an issue with curation, and yeah. I go into more details on that episode, but I think that is a big issue. Is the eShop is just a mess right now,
and it's the hardest thing with eShops in general. Not even just Nintendo's, just like console eShop, like digital marketplaces in general, is that curation is always going to be tough. Like that's why game stores are so great, because it gives you so much more variety to browse around with, like you could spend an hour walking through a game store and being like, what's this game look like? Pick up the case, look at the back, like get a little bit of a sample of it, versus, I mean, you can do all that on a store, but like it's very much catered to what the store is showing you versus what you can actually go and see. Like, and perfect example, right? Among Us, one of the biggest games of the year, that actually released a couple years ago, but no one knew about it because stores, and I'm not blaming the stores. It's not like they maliciously, like Among Us isn't going to get sold or anything like that. Nothing like that. It's more or less just the curation algorithms just suppressed that game for one reason or another. And it wasn't until a streamer found it, trying out a random indie game, and then it blew up and it became this massive, massive success. Fall Guys, similar story. Now, granted, Fall Guys came out this year, but it's a similar idea where it was an indie game that only blew up because of people finding it, and that's.
Well, I guess Fall
that's
Guys.
Every game, but
I feel like Fall Guys in particular, they may have had more attention on them than Among Us did, because Fall Guys partnered with Devolver Digital, and Devolver is very, very, very hardworking in making sure that they get people looking at their games. As far as like publishing goes, they do a great job at satirizing the industry as far as like the presentations and stuff like that go, but they also do a really good job at supporting their independent developers, which I really respect Devolver Digital for.
That's a good point. That is a very good point. But no, it just, digital marketplaces, it's a problem.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, because there can be some great stuff on there, but depending on the frequency of stuff coming out, a lot of that stuff can get buried.
And Nintendo, it wasn't until they started embracing indie devs that they got back that third-party support from even other AAA studios. Like, they ported the new Doom game to the Switch, which is a feat in and of itself. Like, they're putting The Witcher on Switch. Like, there's a bunch of these great third-party titles that are coming onto it. And a lot of the reason, I've probably brought this up before, but Nintendo fucking killed their relationship with third-party devs during the NES and Super Nintendo era. They had these awful practices where like you were only allowed to release a certain number of games. I think it was like 5. You could only release 5 games a year. You had to buy all your cartridges from Nintendo. You couldn't go to a third-party seller. You had to buy them all from them, and they were in bulk. So it's like you had to basically make sure that your game was going to sell. Otherwise, you're going to eat the cost of not just development, but also the cartridges that you had to buy from Nintendo. And then they also had these non-compete clauses where you couldn't, like, if you decided to make a game or, port your game to a different console, they would just remove it from their end, and they would not let you publish on there anymore.
Right.
So game developers, it did loosen a little bit during the 16-bit era, because you would see like Konami and Capcom release stuff on the Genesis, but during the 8-bit and early 16-bit eras, the entirety of the 8-bit and the early 16-bit eras, it was just this stranglehold they had on the industry. And I get why they did it, because the Atari died because there was no quality control. So they were like,
Right.
no, that's not happening to us. So it wasn't like, don't get me wrong, there was definitely some greed involved, but it also was some practical reasonings too. Like, we don't want to be another Atari.
Yeah, no, understandable, especially because they saw the industry almost collapse on itself, and kind of bringing it back from that point. You want to put in some safety measures to to prevent that from happening again. And I, kind of going off topic, I personally feel that we may be seeing too much of a market flood, but I don't know if we're going to ever experience a market crash like we did before.
No, it'll probably just go with ebbs and flows. But in any case, let's wrap this up with one more game. Do you have another game? Do you have one more game you'd want to highlight?
As far as like something that we can kind of do a deep dive on, I'm trying to think, but there's one or two that I kind of want to just like highlight as something to consider.
Let's do that. We'll close out with those then.
There is a series on the GameCube that was actually made by From Software that I don't know if a lot of people are aware of. It's called I've never owned this game. My friend at the time had both games on it in the series, and I watched him play, and it looked interesting. It's called Lost Kingdoms. It's a RPG card. It's like a deck builder RPG where like you defeat monsters and then they become part of your deck type thing. From what I understand, similar to Slay the Spire, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a From Software game. It was on the GameCube. It's a game that I wish I got into to have it be part of my collection. Unfortunately, I did not, but that's definitely the one that people should look into. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to look into that real quick while I pick.
I did look it up. I did actually see a little bit of it on a video I was watching in preparation for this, where like you have a deck of cards, and each every time you use an ability, essentially a separate card is attached to each one of your face buttons on the GameCube controller, or at least I think it only has 4. So like 4 of the face buttons on the GameCube controller. So like A, B, and maybe X or Y or something. I guess X or Y. I don't think it uses Z or any of the L's and R's. And so whenever you have those 4, and you have to choose one of those 4 to use in the combat, in whichever combat scenario you're in, and once you use it, then that card gets discarded and a new card slides into its place. So you're limited in that you only have 4 options in any given situation, it seems like. Now, this is all just from like a very surface level glance that I saw, mind you. I don't know how deep or how accurate I am with this, but from my understanding, from what I watch, is that once you at any given time, you only have 4 different options of moves, and those options will cycle depending on, once you use a move, that card is discarded, a new card slots in. So potentially you could get the same move again, but you're also most likely going to get a completely different card that does something completely different. So it constantly forces you to think on the fly.
Yeah, and like I said, I did not own the game. I would watch my friend play it every once in a while, so my grasp on the mechanics isn't super detailed as well. I think it was just something worth mentioning. I know From Software is like a pretty revered developer now, especially with the Dark Souls and the Demon Souls series. So if you're one of those people that likes to experience the history of a company, that's definitely one of those games that would be worth looking into. But as far as like an actual game to kind of leave off on, I'm trying to think what a good one would be that I actually physically own.
I had no idea how many games From Software actually developed. They did the Armored Core games.
Yeah, I used to play the Armored Core games with a buddy of mine. He was really into it, but I also believe they developed another game called like the Moon or From the Moon or something like that. I was like looking into some of their history because I wanted to see what else they did, but it's a game that I think is on the Switch. It's called like To the Moon or From the Moon, something that way. But I guess to kind of leave off on games worth owning, I would say a game that I spent a lot of time with on the GameCube was Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2.
I think that's a good one. I think it's a good choice to end this because, like, you're right. Not a lot of people know about that series at all anymore.
Yeah, especially nowadays because the series itself has changed so much. If you play Phantasy Star Online 2, it's completely different than the original. It was originally for the Dreamcast, I believe.
Yep.
And then they released it for the GameCube and the Xbox, and I had it on the GameCube, and it was a game that I absolutely fell in love with, like the aesthetic, the gameplay. It's like similar to a dungeon runner to an extent, where you're running the same dungeons for different loot and gear. There's different classes. It's probably a more simplified RPG, but the real-time combat was a big appeal to me. Because again, like I said, I was not a big RPG guy growing up. It was really Phantasy Star and Tales that kind of started pushing me in the direction of being more open to RPGs.
I actually do have some experience with this game as well. I actually played it at my friend Matt's house when I was in high school, and I knew I was so confused by this when I was playing it over at his house. Like, he was showing it to me, and I just did not understand what the purpose of this game was. And to be fair, we didn't play online. It was just me and him playing the game offline, and we were just kind of running around. Like, he didn't really explain anything to me about it. And also, I'm not putting the blame on him entirely either. Like, I barely knew what I was doing with it. I had never played a game like an MMO before. So I didn't know, like, it wasn't explained to me what an MMO or what that type of RPG was. So from this very odd other like macro above everything perspective type of thing, whereas like I was just looking at it from such a weird vantage point where it was beyond me. I didn't understand it. So I'd be curious to go back now and try it.
I think the issue is because I played that game strictly, for the most part, single player, because I didn't have the modem adapter for the GameCube. I just played it by myself. Eventually, I had a friend that picked up a copy, and when I would go over, I would bring my memory card and I would transfer my character over to his system, and we would play, couch co-op. I think the issue falls on Sega at the time because, from what I remember, the story mode wasn't available in multiplayer. Like, you didn't get you didn't get the same dialogue that you would have been getting during single player adventuring.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so it was definitely a different experience. At least from what I remember, it was definitely a different experience between playing it solo and actually playing it with someone.
That would make a lot more sense why it felt so disjointed to me, because like we were just running around and doing stuff. I didn't know why we were doing anything we were doing. Yeah. So it was a very odd game to me. But I don't have it for the GameCube, but I actually have Phantasy Star Online for the Dreamcast. So maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll give the single player a shot on that at some point. But
yeah, it was. It's definitely a great game to play. I mean, from what I understand, even like the online community is still active, like on PC for 1 and 2. There's like private servers you can access. I don't know if there's still a community for the consoles, but
it would be hard. There's actually, just thinking of like old consoles going online, because like in order for them to do that, someone have to figure out a way to set up a server. And I'm sure there's some out there already. But there is actually I heard about this on a podcast recently. There's an old service called X-Band, which was, X-Band game. Yeah, so the X-Band was the first competitive online console gaming network, and was available for the Super Nintendo and Genesis. Oh. And essentially you would plug it into your console and you could play with people online over Xband. Now, thing is with Xband, it was very primitive. Obviously, the infrastructure wasn't the greatest, and it was somewhat laggy from what I've heard. But I also could be conflating what the new one is currently, because they're still going through tests of it. But they have it up and running apparently. Someone figured out how to get Xband to work. So if you want to, you could actually connect your Super Nintendo through your Xband adapter to the internet and connect to this person's server and play multiplayer games over your Xband adapter on your Super Nintendo or Genesis. That's wild. And in 2021, you can play online multiplayer on your Super Nintendo or Genesis. That's crazy.
That's an interesting idea for those that want to kind of like go down that avenue.
I don't have an Xband, but I'm definitely I kind of want one now just for that. But anyway.
But yeah.
But all right, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. We kind of touched on a bunch of hidden gems and didn't go too far into any of them. That gives us some wiggle room, so I could have you back on for some deep dives for some of these.
Yeah.
And so Veech, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, man. Thanks for having me on again. It's always a good time to catch up and chat about games.
So where can the good people find you on the line? Plug your socials, plug your YouTube channel.
Mostly the YouTube. I do have socials, but I don't use them very often. The best way to try to get more of my opinion is to follow me on YouTube, which was youtube.com. I don't know if I have like a custom URL, so just YouTube. Bite Size Pixel, search for me. I think I'm the only channel on there that under that name. So, and
it's BITE, and then Size Pixel is exactly how you spell everything else. Just in case some people were thinking we were going BYTE or anything.
Yeah, no, there's no odd spelling of anything. I should be the channel on there, and I basically just voice my opinions on things, some positive, some negative. Try to do what I can. I don't know. I'm still finding at this point, at time of recording, I'm still trying to figure out the best way of presenting things. I'm learning as I go.
Yeah, and that's the same with every bit of content creation. It takes a while to. It doesn't not necessarily a while, but it can take a while for you to kind of figure out like what your voice is like and how and what your presentation is like. I've said it before on my podcast, like it wasn't until after I finished my 40 for 40 series that I actually was like, okay, I know what this show is now. Like I finally know what I'm doing. And just to put that in perspective, that series ended episode number, hold on. That is episode number 80. It was like episode 79 or 80. So not everyone's going to take 80 episodes to figure out that rhythm, but that was just my personally.
I gotcha.
But yeah, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to reach out to me, you can contact me, stillloadingcontact@gmail.com, or also on any of those social medias I mentioned. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. You can go to Apple Podcasts or give it a 5-star rating and review there, or whichever podcasting app you use. You can also support it by going to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. Even just $1 a month will help grow the show. And definitely the most important shout out I have is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of children receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So please consider donating to them and check them out. You can go to bitbybitfoundation.org. And that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Veech, once again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you again. It was a great time. Hopefully we can do this again a little sooner. Maybe not a
whole year
go
later.
by. Yeah.
And I will see you all next time.